In the dazzling world of billionaires, where every word is weighed and every gesture matters, a single mistake can cost more than money. When Alexander Hiroshi, a powerful yet feared Japanese tycoon, arrived at his international headquarters, he expected flawless communication. But not a single staff member could understand his rapid Japanese orders until a quiet maid in a simple uniform stepped forward. What happened next would shatter his temper and then his heart. This is not just about language, but loyalty, courage, and the moment two worlds collided. Welcome to True Moments Stories. The marble lobby of Hiroshi International gleamed like a palace, every inch speaking of wealth, precision, and pride. Golden sunlight streamed through the towering glass walls, illuminating the centerpiece, a massive, carefully curated arrangement of fresh cherry blossoms, flown in weekly from Kyoto. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and expensive polish. Every surface shone, from the marble floor to the brass handles of the revolving doors. Employees bustled in crisp suits and perfectly shined shoes, their eyes glued to tablets or stacks of neatly bound reports. Receptionists typed with military rhythm, their manicured nails clicking softly against the keys. On the surface, it was calm, professional, the image of a flawless corporate empire. But beneath that polished calm, a ripple of unease ran through the air. Robert, the company's chief of staff, checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. His tie felt a little too tight, his palms faintly clammy. He smoothed the front of his suit, then glanced toward the glass doors again. "He'll be here any second," he muttered under his breath, his eyes darting to a young assistant standing nearby. "Is the presentation ready?" "Yes, sir," the assistant replied, though her voice wavered. We think so." Robert groaned quietly. "You think so? Oh, no, with him there's no thinking so. It's either flawless or it's a disaster." The reason for his anxiety was simple and terrifying. Alexander Hiroshi. The name alone commanded both fear and admiration. The billionaire founder of Hiroshi International was more than a successful businessman. He was a force. Born in Tokyo, educated at Oxford, and now running a global empire from New York, Alexander was famous for two things: saving collapsing companies from ruin and having zero tolerance for incompetence. He wasn't the type to shout or throw papers in frustration. No, he was far worse. When Alexander was displeased, he went quiet. His dark eyes would narrow, his jaw would tense, and the room's air would seem to thin. People called it the Hiroshi silence, and no one wanted to be in its path. Today, Robert feared, might be one of those days. A black limousine slid up to the curb outside. The driver stepped out, straightened his hat, and opened the back door. And there he was. Alexander stepped out with the kind of presence that made heads turn. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored charcoal suit molded to him like a second skin. His jet-black hair was combed back to perfection, a silver tie clip catching the morning light. He moved with purpose, the measured, unhurried pace of a man who knew the world would wait for him. The glass doors opened, and the sound of his polished leather shoes against marble echoed through the lobby. The employees seemed to collectively hold their breath. Without breaking stride, Alexander began speaking, not in English, but in sharp, fluid Japanese. His words cut cleanly through the air, fast and precise, like the edge of a blade. The effect on the staff was instant. Eyes widened, heads tilted, people froze mid-step. Robert's blood drained from his face. Sir," he stammered, taking a half-step forward. "Could you perhaps repeat that in?" Alexander's gaze snapped to him, not angry, just cold. "This is a Japanese company," he said, still in Japanese. "And yet no one here understands me." Silence. A young assistant fumbled for her phone, opening a translation app with trembling fingers. Another employee whispered to the person beside him, "What's he saying? Is it bad?" Alexander's jaw flexed once. He was about to switch to English when from across the room, a voice, calm, steady, and clear, spoke in perfect Japanese. "Sumimasen Hiroshi-sama, watashi ga otsuri ita shimasu." The lobby seemed to still entirely, heads turned. The voice belonged to Emma. She stood by the far wall, a silver tray balanced effortlessly in her hands. Dressed in the simple navy uniform of the housekeeping staff, her brown hair was tied back neatly, a few loose strands framing her face. Her hazel eyes, steady and unflinching, met Alexander. For a split second, he looked surprised. "You speak Japanese?" His tone was careful, measured. "Yes, sir," she replied without hesitation. In flawless Japanese, she added, "If you allow me, I can translate your instructions for the staff." Robert's jaw practically hit the marble floor. He'd worked alongside Emma for 6 months and had never heard her speak more than a polite "good morning" in English. Alexander regarded her for another beat before giving a single, decisive nod. "Very well." Emma stepped forward. Her voice in English was just as clear as it had been in Japanese. "Mr. Hiroshi needs the Tokyo presentation updated. Remove slide 14. Replace the profit forecast with the new data from Singapore, and prepare an additional visual on projected yen fluctuations." The staff sprang into action instantly. Chairs rolled, keyboards clattered, printers whirred. The frozen panic melted into movement. Alexander watched it all without a word, his sharp eyes occasionally flicking back to Emma. When she returned to him, bowing slightly, he switched back to Japanese. "Where did you learn to speak my language so well?" Her answer was brief, but there was a flicker of something in her tone. "I lived in Osaka for 5 years." His gaze lingered on her for a fraction longer than necessary, as if trying to read the unspoken story in her eyes. Then, with a curt "interesting," he turned toward the elevators. Robert, still half in shock, muttered to Emma as soon as Alexander was out of earshot. "What was that? Since when do you?" She just gave a small smile. "Guess it never came up before." The rest of the day, whispers followed Emma like shadows. "She's just a maid, right?" one assistant murmured to another. "A maid who speaks better Japanese than the CEO's translators," came the reply. Emma ignored it all. She went about her duties as always, arranging conference rooms, replenishing executive suites with fresh fruit and bottled water, ensuring every tea service was exactly to Japanese tradition. Her movements were efficient, her focus unshaken. And yet every so often she found herself remembering the way Alexander's gaze had settled on her. It wasn't just curiosity, it was assessing. That evening, after most of the staff had gone home, Emma was polishing the long mahogany conference table in the executive boardroom. The city lights outside cast a faint glow over the glass walls, and the quiet hum of the air conditioning filled the space. The sound of footsteps made her look up. Alexander stood in the doorway. His jacket was off, tie loosened, a rare, almost disarming sight. Without the rigid perfection of his usual appearance, he seemed more human, though no less imposing. "You're still here," he said, his voice even. "Just finishing up, sir," she replied. "I reviewed the Tokyo presentation. The updates were satisfactory." A pause. "Thanks to your translation." "You're welcome, Mr. Hiroshi." He stepped inside, his gaze scanning the perfectly arranged table before returning to her. "You said you lived in Osaka. Why?" Emma hesitated, her hand tightening around the polishing cloth. "It was a different life, a long time ago." Something shifted in his expression, almost imperceptible, but there. He didn't press further. "I see," he said simply, before turning toward the door. But just before leaving, he glanced back. "Your Japanese is not just fluent, it is native level. That is not something one forgets." She didn't respond. The elevator doors closed behind him, and Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She didn't know why her heart felt heavier than usual, only that this unexpected moment, this strange intersection between their worlds, was not over. Not by a long shot. The next morning began like any other at Hiroshi International, or so it seemed on the surface. Emma arrived just before sunrise, the city still wrapped in a soft gray haze. The early hour meant the marble lobby was empty except for the security guards, who greeted her with a friendly nod. She slipped through the staff entrance, changed into her crisp navy uniform, and began her usual rounds. But there was a difference today. The moment she stepped onto the executive floor, she felt the stares. Not overt, not hostile, but watchful. Whispers trailed behind her as she moved between offices, delivering fresh coffee, collecting empty trays from late-working executives. "They say she saved the Tokyo meeting yesterday," one voice murmured. "Yeah, by speaking perfect Japanese to the boss himself." Why would a maid even know that? Emma kept her head down, her expression calm. She'd lived through worse gossip than this. Still, she could feel the weight of curiosity pressing in from every corner. By mid-morning, she was delivering a tea set to the top-floor boardroom when Robert intercepted her. "Emma," he began, his tone carefully polite, "Mr. Hiroshi has requested you in his office. Immediately." Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray. "Did he say why?" Robert shook his head. "He doesn't explain his requests, he just requests." Alexander's office occupied the far corner of the top floor, with a sweeping view of Manhattan through floor-to-ceiling glass. The morning sun painted the room in gold, glinting off the glass desk and the minimalist sculptures placed with precision around the space. He was standing by the window when Emma entered, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a sleek tablet. He didn't look up right away. "Come in," he said, still in Japanese. She stepped inside, placing the tray on a low side table. "Good morning, Mr. Hiroshi." "Emma," he began, his tone even but carrying that undercurrent of command, "I require your assistance again. Today, we have a delegation arriving from Kyoto. None of the department heads speak Japanese fluently enough to handle direct conversation. You will be present in all meetings." Emma's brow furrowed slightly. "Sir, I'm part of the housekeeping staff. His gaze snapped to hers, sharp but not unkind. "Yesterday, you prevented a costly delay by translating my instructions precisely. That skill is more valuable to me today than whether a conference table is polished." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Yes, sir." "Good," he set the tablet down. "They arrive at 11, wear something appropriate for an interpreter." Her eyes widened slightly. She didn't have something appropriate. Her wardrobe was a collection of modest dresses and practical work clothes. As if reading her thoughts, Alexander added, "Robert will arrange it. That will be all for now." An hour later, Emma found herself in a boutique just 2 blocks from the office. A discreet company credit card in her hand and Robert looking both flustered and fascinated by the task. "Mr. Hiroshi said you need to look professional," Robert explained, flipping through a rack of tailored blazers. "And when he says professional, he means flawless." Emma kept her tone light. "I don't usually shop for flawless, just functional." "Well, today's different." Robert handed her a soft cream blouse and a charcoal pencil skirt. "Try these." By the time they returned to the office, she barely recognized herself in the mirror, hair neatly styled, clothes fitting perfectly, a simple silver pendant at her neck. She looked less like a maid and more like someone who belonged at the table where decisions were made. At 11 sharp, the delegation from Kyoto arrived. 5 men in immaculate suits, their movements precise, their expressions polite but unreadable. Alexander greeted them with a formal bow, speaking rapidly in Japanese. Emma stood just behind him, her hands clasped in front of her, translating each exchange for the English-speaking executives in the room. At first, the conversation was strictly business, market projections, cultural considerations for a new product launch, adjustments to the proposed advertising campaign. Emma's translations were seamless, her tone shifting subtly to match the formality or warmth of the moment. But halfway through the meeting, one of the Kyoto delegates made an offhand remark, a joke, light and slightly teasing, aimed at Alexander. The kind of thing that could easily be misunderstood if translated literally. Emma caught the glint of humor in the man's eyes and chose her words carefully, softening the phrasing in English so the intended playfulness wasn't lost. Alexander's gaze flicked toward her for a brief second, as if he'd noticed the discretion. When the meeting ended, the Kyoto team departed with satisfied smiles, and the department heads murmured thanks to Emma before hurrying off to their own tasks. Alexander lingered. "You handled that well," he said in Japanese. "I was only doing my job," she replied. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. That is not your job, and yet you did it better than most trained interpreters I've worked with. Emma lowered her eyes briefly. Thank you, sir. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then he asked, why did you leave Osaka? The question caught her off guard. Her hands tightened slightly around the folder she'd been carrying. It's complicated. I have time, he said simply. She met his gaze, searching for any sign of judgment there. She saw only curiosity, but the truth of her past wasn't something she was ready to offer, not yet. I should get back to my regular duties, she said instead. Alexander studied her for another moment before giving a short nod. Very well, but this will not be the last time I ask. That evening, after the offices emptied and the city lights shimmered beyond the glass, Emma stayed behind to tidy the boardroom. She was stacking folders when a voice spoke from the doorway. You're still here. It was Alexander again, jacket over his arm, tie loosened. So are you, she replied. He stepped inside, his gaze drifting to the neat rows of chairs she'd already aligned. I don't usually notice the details of this room. Today, I did. She gave a faint smile. It's my job to make sure the details go unnoticed. That means they're right. He studied her for a moment, then asked, do you miss Japan? Her breath caught slightly. Every day. Something shifted in his expression again, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even kinship. Without another word, he turned and left. But Emma knew, somehow, that their paths were crossing for a reason neither of them fully understood yet. And somewhere deep down, she suspected that reason was about to change both of their lives forever. The next few days at Hiroshi International passed, in a way Emma had never experienced before. Her daily responsibilities as a maid still filled her mornings, polishing the executive floor, replenishing fresh flowers, ensuring coffee and tea service ran smoothly. But now, there was a new layer to her role. Whenever a Japanese client or partner visited, Alexander personally summoned her to sit in on meetings as his interpreter. It was a strange balance. In 1 hour, she could be kneeling to pick up a dropped pen from under a desk, and the next, she'd be seated at the head of a long conference table, translating high-level negotiations worth millions. The whispers from other staff had shifted in tone. Where before they'd been tinged with suspicion, now they were edged with curiosity and maybe a hint of envy. Did you see her outfit in the last meeting? I heard she made a joke in Japanese, and even the boss laughed. Bet she's got some kind of secret history with him. Emma ignored it all. She de-learned long ago that gossip was like wind. It blew hard at first, but if you kept your head down, it eventually passed. Still, the attention wasn't only from coworkers. She'd begun to notice the way Alexander's eyes lingered on her when she spoke, the way his expression softened ever so slightly when she handled an awkward moment in translation with grace. On Thursday afternoon, she was called into his office again. The skyline behind him was washed in the pale winter light, the city's heartbeat visible in the slow flow of traffic far below. Tomorrow night, he began, there's a formal gala at the Metropolitan to celebrate the Kyoto partnership. Attendance is expected. Emma tilted her head slightly. For you, sir. For both of us, he said without hesitation. She blinked me. They'll be bringing representatives who speak only Japanese, he explained. I need someone beside me who can bridge the gap. She hesitated, the memory of her modest wardrobe flashing in her mind. Alexander's mouth curved just faintly. Robert will arrange the necessary attire. It was the second time he'd said those words to her. And like the first, they left her with the sense that she was being drawn into a world she had no business belonging to. The next day passed in a blur of preparations. Robert whisked her away to an exclusive designer showroom where champagne was offered as casually as water, and the gowns shimmered under soft golden lights. Emma found herself staring at her reflection in a floor-length mirror, the deep midnight blue dress clinging gently to her figure, the silk flowing like water when she moved. Her hair was styled into soft waves, a touch of makeup highlighting her eyes. For a moment, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. "You'll do," Robert said with a rare smile. "Actually, you'll more than do." The gala was a different world entirely. The Metropolitan's grand hall glittered under crystal chandeliers, the sound of a live string quartet floating through the air. Guests in evening gowns and tuxedos mingled beneath towering arrangements of orchids and cherry blossoms, the soft murmur of conversation mixing with the clinking of champagne glasses. Alexander arrived beside her, every inch the commanding figure in a tailored black suit, his tie a subtle deep blue that almost matched her dress. The moment they entered, heads turned. The Kyoto representatives greeted Alexander warmly, and Emma slipped into her role seamlessly, translating introductions, smoothing over moments when cultural nuances could have been missed. But she wasn't just translating words, she was translating worlds. When one of the elder delegates made a poetic remark about the fleeting nature of cherry blossoms and business opportunities, she didn't just give the literal English. She conveyed the layered meaning, the unspoken warning beneath the beauty of the metaphor. Alexander's eyes met hers briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. As the evening progressed, they moved from group to group, Emma always a half step behind Alexander, ready to step in. But there were moments, brief, stolen moments, when it was just the two of them at the edge of the crowd. "You're doing well," he said quietly in Japanese at one point, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "I'm doing my job," she replied, a faint smile playing at her lips. His gaze held hers for a beat longer than necessary before he turned back to the gathering. It was near the end of the night when the unexpected happened. One of the younger Kyoto delegates, emboldened by too many glasses of sake, made a careless remark, one that, if translated directly, could have been taken as an insult to the American side of the partnership. Emma's mind worked in an instant. She shifted the phrasing, keeping the spirit of his words but stripping away the sting, turning it into a light-hearted observation instead. The Americans laughed. The delegate smiled, unaware of how close he'd come to causing a diplomatic ripple. Alexander's jaw had tightened for a moment, but when she glanced at him, she saw the tension fade. His eyes softened, not just in gratitude, but in something deeper, something almost protective. The gala ended past midnight. The car ride back to the city was quiet at first, the streets outside glowing under the amber streetlights. "You didn't translate his words exactly," Alexander said finally. Emma's hands rested in her lap. "No, I translated what he meant to say." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You protected him." "I protected the meeting," she corrected softly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "Most people in that position would have used the moment to make themselves look clever." "I'm not most people," she replied. His gaze lingered on her, and she could feel it, like the weight of a question he hadn't decided to ask yet. When they reached her building, he didn't say goodnight right away. Instead, he simply said, "Tomorrow, my office, 10 a.m. Emma stepped out of the car into the cool night air, her heart still unsettled. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew that whatever it was, it would pull her even further into Alexander Hiroshi's world. And somewhere deep down, she wasn't sure if she was ready for what that might mean. The next morning, Emma arrived at the office precisely at 10, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. She'd barely slept after the gala, every glance, every unspoken moment with Alexander replayed in her mind like scenes from a film she couldn't turn off. When she stepped off the executive elevator, Robert was already waiting. "Mr. Hiroshi is expecting you," he said with his usual clipped formality. But there was a faint gleam in his eyes, something that hinted he knew more than he would ever say aloud. Emma walked into Alexander's office, where the man himself stood by the tall windows, looking out over the city. His suit today was a sharp gray, his tie a deep burgundy. Without turning, he spoke, "You handled yourself well last night." "Thank you, sir," she said, keeping her tone even. He turned then, his dark eyes meeting hers. "But that's not the only reason I called you here." She waited, her hands clasped lightly in front of her. "I'm flying to Kyoto next week to finalize the partnership. You'll be coming with me." Her breath caught. To Japan. Yes, he said simply. You're the only one I trust to manage the language and the subtleties. She hesitated. Sir, I haven't been back since. She trailed off, the memories threatening to surface. The quiet streets of Osaka, the phone call that had shattered her world. Alexander's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. You don't have to explain, but think carefully before you say no. The following week passed in a blur of preparations. Emma found herself in meetings with Alexander's travel coordinators, reviewing itineraries, translating correspondence with the Kyoto partners. It was a side of the company and of Alexander she'd never seen up close before. And then, in what felt like no time at all, she was boarding his private jet. The cabin was quiet luxury, cream leather seats, polished wood paneling, the faint scent of fresh orchids in a crystal vase on the table. Alexander worked silently across from her, his laptop open, papers spread out in a meticulous arrangement. Every now and then, she caught him glancing at her, as if to confirm she was still there. Kyoto was everything Emma remembered and more. The winter air was crisp, carrying the scent of cedar and wood smoke. Narrow streets lined with traditional wooden machiya houses led to bustling markets where vendors sold steaming bowls of udon and perfectly wrapped sweets. But there was no time for sightseeing. From the moment they arrived, meetings filled their days, long, intense sessions where Emma's skills were tested constantly. She translated legal terms, business strategies, even moments of humor so deftly that both sides felt understood. It wasn't until the third evening that Alexander suggested they take a short walk after dinner. The city was quiet, the streets glowing under paper lanterns. You haven't lost it, he said in Japanese, his tone warmer than usual. Lost what? That ability to see what people mean, not just what they say. She glanced at him, her breath visible in the cold air. You make it sound like a rare thing. It is, he said simply. They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sound the soft crunch of snow under their shoes. The next day was the final negotiation session, and the most critical. The Kyoto partners had agreed to everything except one clause in the contract, a clause Alexander insisted was non-negotiable. Tension filled the room. Emma could feel it in the way the senior delegate's voice grew sharper, the way Alexander's posture stiffened. The delegate spoke at length, his words measured but his meaning clear. If this clause remained, the deal might collapse. Emma translated carefully, then looked at Alexander. He's not challenging the clause itself. He's asking for assurance that it won't be used against them in the future. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. And what do you suggest? She met his gaze steadily. Give him your word in his language, not in English, not on paper, from you to him. For a moment, Alexander said nothing. Then he turned to the delegate and spoke in slow, deliberate Japanese. His voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room lean forward, as if hearing not just words, but the promise behind them. When Emma translated, she kept her voice soft but firm. I give you my word as a man, not just as a businessman. The room was silent for a beat, and then the delegate smiled. The tension broke like ice under sunlight. That night, the deal was celebrated over a traditional kaiseki dinner. Courses of delicate sashimi, grilled fish, and fragrant rice were served in lacquered dishes, each presentation a work of art. Alexander sat beside Emma, their conversation easy now, flowing between English and Japanese without effort. At one point, he leaned slightly closer, his voice low. You were right about speaking to him directly. You were the one who convinced him, she replied. Only because you understood what he needed to hear. She felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the sake they were drinking. Their last day in Kyoto was unexpectedly free before the evening flight. Alexander suggested they visit a small temple on the outskirts of the city. It was quiet, the air filled with the scent of pine and incense. They stood before the temple bell, its bronze surface worn smooth by centuries of hands. When I was a boy, Alexander said quietly, my grandmother brought me here. She told me that if you ring the bell with sincerity, the sound will carry your wish to the heavens. Emma smiled faintly and did it. "I wish to become a man she would be proud of," he said. Then he handed her the wooden beam used to strike the bell. "Your turn." She hesitated, then pulled the beam back and let it swing forward. The bell's deep, resonant tone filled the air, lingering in the crisp winter sky. They stood there for a long moment, listening. On the flight back, something had shifted between them. They spoke less, but the silences were comfortable, charged with an unspoken understanding. When they landed, Robert met them at the airport. "Successful trip, I presume." Alexander's eyes met Emma's briefly. "Very." Back at the office, Emma expected things to return to normal, cleaning, organizing, translating when needed. But Alexander seemed determined to keep her close. She was called into more high-level meetings, included in strategy discussions, even asked for her opinion on matters far beyond translation. And somewhere along the way, she realized she wasn't just his interpreter anymore. She was his confidant. One evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, Emma was still in the conference room, organizing notes from the day's meetings. She didn't hear Alexander enter until he spoke. "You've changed things here," he said. She looked up. "I've just been doing my job." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You've changed the way I work, the way I think." There was something in his eyes, something that made her pulse quicken. "I don't know what this is," he admitted, "but I know I don't want it to end." Emma's breath caught. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city outside. Then she said softly, "Neither do I." That night, as she left the building, the city lights seemed brighter, the air sharper, her steps lighter. She didn't know where this new path would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to follow it. Because sometimes, the most unexpected conversations are the ones that change everything.